this woman Vicenta, who in her hometown is called Bising, and then her name is also Vicky, you know, because she has many names. And in the course of, Vicky wants to be friends with her, but Nellie, this is the narrator, Nellie continuously eschews Vicky's company because Vicky is like I can't quote it, but like a dog tailing after her, always wanting to be friends with her, right? So Vicky represents a Filipina, a dependent kind of Filipina, whom Nellie doesn't want to associate with because Nellie doesn't want to become like that. Nellie doesn't want to be like these other Filipinas. If you look at the story, just from its surface, it seems that the whole story is telling you that you need to take hold of your life and not become like Bising or Vicky. Vicky eventually commits suicide because she can't stand up to the sexual advances of her employer. She can't. She is like a victim, right? She's a victim of the circumstances of overseas contract workers. So if you look at the outlines of the story, it would seem that the story is trying to construct this feminist subject out of Nellie. But in the reading that I make of the story, I notice certain things about the way that she devalues Vicky, she devalues the other Filipino workers. But she devalues them at great cost to herself, right? She becomes individualist, she becomes consumerist, right? And the cost of that, of course, is Vicky plunging to her death because there's no solidarity between Nellie and Vicky. There's a small scene in that story in which somebody brings pasalubong from the Philippines, green mangoes. Bring green mangoes from the Philippines. Nellie's in the bus, but because she doesn't want to participate in the activities of the other Filipino workers, she pretends not to see or notice. But then her mouth starts to sour. The hair on her body starts to, you know, it's, what do you call that in Tagalog? Huh? Nangangasim. She has this souring sensation that she has to control in order to be the kind of feminist subject she wants to be. I take that moment in the story of showing other ways of being, that souring sensation, that participating in the activities of the other workers, as a different kind of subjectivity from the subjectivity of the sovereign subject that feminists want to create as a means of liberation. It is something that she, as a subject, devalues and says politically worthless, right? But if you look at all of the ways in which overseas contract workers spend their times, what she calls times of waste, right? Idle times where do they go on Sundays? In the parks, and they consume things and they have a good time. In the novel, they go to church, they watch porn movies, they have outings, they eat, right? These are all waste of time. Waste of time according to Nellie. Because if you want to succeed in life, you don't waste your time on these kinds of things. You take the time, you use your time to accumulate value for yourself. But rather than taking the moral or the lesson of the story, I show that all of those wasted times of Filipinas abroad are actually the times that they need to be the laborers that support the domestic service industry, that support their employers, that replenish them experientially, that help them to cope. So these are actually times of value, unlike the idea that they're worthless times. These are times that help to produce ourselves. The things that we do to make ourselves viable in the world also helps us to become labor for the global economy, right? And now you will not understand the importance of thinking about this unless you understand the way economists think. Economists think that profit comes from the hard work of capitalists. Right? They think that value is created by the mental skills, right? The managerial skills, the brilliance and creativity of corporations, right? But if you see from an anti-economistic point of view, that the experiences of women who are labor, who are part of this global economy, are actually vital to the accumulation of capital, then there's a different way of thinking about those same experiences as politically valuable, that are the political resources, right? Resources that help people, not only to help them survive, but also resources for transforming society. Is this all very abstract yet? Do you have any questions so far? Yes.
You said that the book states what we should do or what we need to do now in times of crisis and the like. So, I just want to know what's the point of using the Filipinos before and the feminists as references to the things that we need to do now? What's their relationship?
Why look at feminist literature?
Yeah. Or the Filipinos before as references to the things that we need to do now.
Well, this is, when you say before, this was not so long ago. This was only in the 80s, right?
No.
I mean, it wasn't, right? It was only in the 80s. I know you were probably not born then, but for some of us, that's not so long ago. And I mean, politically speaking, the 80s is part of the making of the 21st century. I mean, in all of these decades, you see how the current situation has emerged, right? So you can't only look at the current situation to understand what is to be done. If you don't understand what were the efforts before and what were the conditions before that led up to the current moment, right? So that was an early moment before, at the very beginning of the export of domestic labor. Fanny Garcia was already thinking about the contradictions and the conditions of overseas contract workers. Now, we have so naturalized this condition that nobody even pays attention to it as something that really should be worth remarking on, thinking about, right? So, what is important about looking at literature is that it denaturalizes what is around us, right? You're able to look at it in a new way rather than thinking, ganyan lang talaga, right? That's just the way the world is. Okay, so that's one example. Another example is, of course, another example when I look at urban activist literature, where I look at June Cruz Reyes, you know Jose Lacaba, poet, journalist. Right? Jose Lacaba wrote all these poems before and during martial law, up to the present, obviously. And this is a complicated argument, but I'll try to simplify it. Lacaba writes about the lumpen proletariat. You know what the lumpen proletariat are? They're the people who are underemployed in the urban areas. They don't have steady work. They're casuals. They, whether it's watch your car boys or tricycle drivers. Well, they're workers, but they don't always work for companies, right? They have no steady work, or they may have no work at all. Okay. So anyway, Lacaba writes about these people. What's interesting about Lacaba's poems is that, Lacaba is again, I did not bring it. Lacaba is a very interesting writer because in the 70s, Lacaba, who wrote screenplays also for the films. Do you know what screenplays he wrote for? He wrote the screenplays for a lot of Roca films, right? So he wrote a lot of these social realist films. But in his poems, he doesn't write so much about social realist